Welcome to episode 51. In this session, we will dive into the important topics of managing applications and API access in Azure Entra ID. We will also try to understand how to register and configure applications, manage the roles, and secure APIs in a crucial Entra ID environment for a very smooth operation with your enterprise application. Now, whether you are a developer or an IT administrator, this episode will walk you through best practices for configuring and securing your applications in Azure Entra ID. So let's get started. Well, the first topic is registering your application in Entra ID. Well, the first step to manage your application in Azure Entra ID is to register it and also configure the application later on. Why you should register an application? Well, it is crucial because registering your application will ensure secure authentication and access to Azure resources. This gives you or your organization more control over apps or applications, identity and access management. The next is your application identity. Now, each registered application has a unique client ID or client identification, plus a tenant ID. These IDs or identification helps identify the application and authenticate it. The application is secured by secrets or certificates to protect its communication between the application itself, whether it is running on-prem or on Azure, and your Entra ID. Remember, your application might be actually hosted on-prem, but you can still register it with Entra ID. Here, Entra ID is just providing IAM solution, that is, Identity and Access Management Solution. Now, the next is authentication. Well, Azure Entra supports industry standard authentication protocols such as Auth 2.0, OIDC, and SAML. These are vital for secure communication between your application and users or services on Azure. Remember, even if your application is running on-prem, but if that application wants to register with Entra ID via internet using public domain, in simple words, the communication will come through internet channels, then you have to use the authentication protocols which are compatible with HTTPS traffic or internet. And Entra ID actually use that. The next is permissions. Well, access to APIs is controlled using scopes and admin consent. This ensures that application or any service or web application only have the permissions they need and that sensitive data is protected on both fronts. How about security? Well, Entra ID also provide additional layers of protection like MFA, that is multi-factor authentication, role-based access control, that is RBAC, and also conditional access. Well, these features help ensure that only authorized users and applications can access your resources. Registering your application with Entra ID also gives you the benefit of SSO. That is, once your applications are registered, you can now enable this feature with protocols such as SAML, OIDC, and WS Federation as well. This will allow you or any other user to access multiple applications seamlessly without having to log in again and again with different credentials. You just have to remember one credential and one-time login, single sign-on. This will improve both user experience and security. Now, role of app registration. service principals, and managed identity. So let's break down the role of app registration first. Well, here you can see the role of app or application registration is simple. It is there to register your application with Entra ID. When you create any application registration with Entra, you actually define your application's identity as if that application have a unique name. This is global identity, which will be unique all over the world. And it will also be used for your authentication purpose in the future. So what is service principals then? Well, a service principal is an instance of your application that is specific to a tenant. Now, this can be your organization's tenant or even any other organization's tenant. You can have multi-tenant as well. Means it is possible that users from multiple tenants can actually log in to a single application. It is basically used for access control, ensuring that only the authorized application has the right permissions within that particular tenant boundary. Then, managed identities. Well, these are special identities created by Azure for use with Azure resources like virtual machines or logical apps or logic apps. They simplify access control by managing credentials automatically. You don't have to, or you don't actually need to store secrets manually here. You can also use key vaults for that. Now, some key differences. Well, app registration. This defines the application at global level. This is your application's identity. I will repeat, app registration defines the application at global level. You can also say it defines the identity of the application, and it is unique. Next is service principal. Well, service principal represents the application within a specific tenant. So it will connect or relate that application with a specific tenant. Now, if you have multiple tenants, will you have multiple service principals? Yes, because that application have to relate with multiple tenants now. Next is managed identity. Well, this is an auto-managed identity for Azure services, not resources, services, which removes the need for manual secret management or password or key phrase management. Let's talk about some of the key use cases. Well, app registration is used for integrating third-party application or even custom enterprise application with Azure Entra. Service principal, well, this is useful for secure communication between applications and Azure services. Well, just think about it. If the application needs a database at the backend, well, you can use Azure for maintaining your database. Now, your application needs to talk with that database securely. Well, you need a service principal for that. Next is managed identities. Well, this is ideal for securing resources like virtual machine, functions, logic apps, and many more services of Azure without dealing with credentials directly. Here, your key vault will also play a major role. Let's move to our next topic, that is securing APIs and managing permissions using auth scopes and consent. Well, this is one of the most common ways to control access to APIs. For that, you will use these protocols. Let's talk about auth scopes. Well, these scopes define what actions an application can perform on behalf of a user. For example, an application might only have permission to read a user profiles from the database, or it could have broader permissions to modify user data at the backend. Now, if the application wants to perform all these actions without involving user intervention, well, Auth will be the protocol that application will use. User versus admin consent. Well, what is user consent? These are permissions that a user can grant to an application, like reading their profile or viewing their calendar or viewing their data in the backend database. Well, for this, again, the application must be registered first. So what is admin consent then? Well, these are also permissions that require an administrator to grant, typically for more sensitive actions. So admin will grant the access. Sensitive operation will be modification of user data or deletion of user data and such. Now, if you move forward, we'll talk about protecting APIs with Auth. Well, here you assign specific scopes to control access to your APIs. These scopes are included in access tokens, which are then used to authorize access to resources. This ensures secure and controlled access. Now, what are some best practices to implement all this? Well, you should always follow the least privilege principle. So please only grant permissions that are necessary, even to your application. You should also regularly review and revoke unused permissions to minimize potential security risk in the future. You should also consider conditional access and putting MFA for sensitive actions to ensure that high-value operations are properly secured. This will also increase or make your security posture much more robust. Now let's go to the lab and try to register an application with Entra ID and also check how we can log into that application. And if you are actually prompted for logging in with your credentials or not. So I will see you in the lab. All right, now let's check out how to connect an application with Entra ID to manage application access control. So before that, I must have a running application, and I do have a demo application. Sorry for that. This is just a demo application running without any layer of IAM, Identity and Access Management Solution. So if I copy the domain name and I go to a window and paste it, as you can see, I can go to my application without requiring any credentials or authentication. But I don't want that. So you need to connect your application with Entra and must be done from both sides. So first you will go to Entra ID, then under Manage you will click on App Registration. Here you will create a new registration. I will call it Demo App Registration. Now, accounts in this organizational directory only have a single tenant account for demo purposes. So I will use this option. Now over here, redirect URI is actually important, the URL. So my application is actually a static web application, so I will select that. And over here, I have to present the address of my application. So once the user is authenticated, that user will be redirected to this location. So what's the address? I can go to my application to check for the address, and this is the one. So I'll copy it. And you have to put it in the right format. All right. And that's not it. You have to enter the full path. So this is actually a callback. So you have to enter that as well. So this will be the address of my application, and this is the default path for all the Entra users to call back to the same application after authentication. So you have to enter this and click on register. The work is not done yet. You have to go to your app service and also connect it. So this application right now is just available for everyone, but we don't want that. So under settings, I will click on authentication. And as you can see, there is no identity provider right now. So I have to add an identity provider. So click on it. And who will provide the identity? In my case, it's Microsoft. Do I have to create a new app registration? Not really. I already have one. So I will select mine. That is demo app registration. And that's all. I will just say add this. Perfect. Don't worry about that. This will be resolved shortly. I will do that. Let's just test it. So let's go ahead and go to our application. For that, I need the address. This is the address. Let's go over here and click enter. And here we go. So now we have to provide the credentials first to be able to get in. So Entra ID is actually invoked. This application redirected us to Entra ID. Once we give a right authentication, only then we can move forward. So this is how you actually connect your application with Entra ID, where Entra will become the identity provider or that service. All right, so remember that issue? Now let's resolve it. So the token flow is broken. So for that, you will go back to your app registration under Entra ID Manage, then find your app registration, click on it, and go to Authentication. So basically, we don't have any mechanism to flow the token in our application. My application is very static and simple. So you have to select these options here. So if you go to Authentication, under Web Redirect URL, you will see Implicit Grant and Hybrid Flow. I will select that. All right, now let's wait. All right, so everything is okay. The token flow is there. And now we can also try to sign in. Again, I need the address. I will open a new session, incognito, and let's log in with my user account. Perfect. Put the username and the password and sign in. You may be asked for your permissions, so just say consent on behalf of my organization and accept it. All right, now we are in and everything is working. Welcome back. Now, I hope you know how easy it is to actually create an app registration. But remember, if your application is super complex and have multiple dependencies, then the integration of those application and services with Entra ID may look a little bit more complex. But remember, the logic is still the same, that you register your application with Entra ID to take benefit of Entra ID's potential, that is AAA, authentication, authorization, and auditing. So to wrap up, in this episode, we learned how to manage application and API access within Azure Entra ID ecosystem. We covered how to register and configure application, the importance of app identities and scopes, and also how to use service principals and manage identities for secure access. Additionally, we discussed best practices for securing APIs using Auth and managed permissions through user and admin consent. By following these practices, you'll be able to ensure secure and efficient application management in Azure. So stay tuned for more Azure services in the future episode. I will see you there. Take care.